Okay, so we're going to go through the second part of the Gold Rush videos that we're going to look at this term. Before we do, I'm just going to give you a quick intro of what's happened up until now. So after Bathurst finds the gold and it gets payable goldfield, Victoria decide that they are losing people to the gold fields in New South Wales. So to do something about it, they start trying to look for gold, and they do find quite a bit of gold in a place called Ballarat. So when we play it, I'm going to play it and I'm just going to let it play for about 6 or 7 minutes, and then I'm going to stop and I'll come in at the end and I'll try to go through and summarize what's happened. Okay. So at the moment we're coming into the goldfields at Ballarat, and people have just started to strike it rich and getting gold fever. All right.
The early prospectors dug hundreds of ounces of gold in a day, 10 years' wages. Others would quickly race back to Melbourne, eager to spend their newfound wealth. And Melbourne went mad with gold fever.
The whole town was in hysterics. Gentlemen foaming at the mouth, ladies fainting, children throwing somersaults, and all on account of the extraordinary news at Ballarat.
But within a month, Ballarat's thousands of shallow pits were soon depleted of their rich surface gold. It wouldn't be till later that the huge underground reserves would be discovered. The prospectors then rushed quickly to the next new find, just 40 miles to the north, at Mount Alexander, near Castlemaine. Here, 15 square miles of rich ground was there for the taking.
Hundreds walked away with fortunes of gold dug out of the shallow ground in the first few weeks. Victoria rapidly took over from New South Wales as the golden capital of Australia, as thousands of gold seekers flooded to the new fields.
1851 was a big year in Australia for gold discovery, and in November, Margaret Kennedy and Mrs. Farrell discovered another massive find at Bendigo.
We got a great deal of gold in the first few weeks while working alone. We found a lot in the banks of the creek and in the sods of the grass. You could shut your eyes and get gold in a dish anywhere.
When the journalist Henry Frensham came across the find in December, he announced it to the press as a Christmas box to the nation, and Bendigo was rushed. The pedestrian population of Melbourne was visibly depleted as the town went crazy in the haste to find their own El Dorado. Ships lay idle in the harbour as entire crews deserted. Businesses had to close as their staff and managers departed for the fields. The roads were crowded with travellers, drays and wheelbarrows in a mixed confusion from magistrates to labourers. The next few years saw new fields opening up all over the state.
The welcome stranger nugget was unearthed just 1 foot below the surface. A massive lump of gold weighing over 2,000 ounces, the largest nugget in the world. As the news spread around the world, Melbourne boomed as tens of thousands of immigrants arrived, all hopeful of striking it rich in the Australian colony. The wealth that these fields provided made Melbourne the Australian capital of opulence and stimulated the economies of the other Commonwealth nations as gold was sold around the world. But the oppressive British governor of the time, Charles Hotham, was becoming increasingly concerned.
We might leave that video there about Charles Hotham, because Charles Hotham is going to play a very, very important role in a lot of the activities to come. But let's just summarize what we just saw. So Ballarat have this gold field, which they start finding gold, and everybody starts going there, and within a few weeks it's all gone. all the surface gold, sorry. When they say that it got found later, it's because they had mining equipment to go really, really far down, and they found that Ballarat had so much gold, but the surface level gold, the alluvial gold, it was found really quickly. And then they decided to move on because they found somewhere else to go. Now you can imagine in a colony which had a lot of ex-convicts, a lot of people have been emancipated, that this potential to find this level of I guess, wealth had been unheard of. And so, of course, people were going to get up and start getting sort of gold fever. The women are a perfect example. Those two women, finding a gold field, finding a place where you could find your own gold and then not tell anyone was quite common. You're trying to find your own area, but word somehow spread really quickly. If you ever found a place where there was gold, somehow everybody knew, because when you came back to that town and started spending that money, they were wondering, where did you get that? Where did you get that? Where is she? People were just like, had their ears pricked the whole time trying to find out who had found somewhere to go. And if you did and you were there early, so the best thing those women were doing was trying to keep it quiet. But then that journalist found it, and then it became the Bendigo goldfields, which were very, very popular. Now, the funny thing about that is when they talked about, so Melbourne, the town of Melbourne was like the city. Like, think about Sydney, which was where most of the stuff was happening. But when the goldfields hit in Ballarat and Bendigo, people just left. So the streets of Melbourne are now bare because people are leaving their jobs. The managers leaving their jobs. The workers leaving their jobs. Because as that guy said in that first part, you could find 10 years' wages in one find. So of course you're going to leave your low-paying job because you're an ex-convict not getting paid much money, and there's a chance to go and find gold that will set you up for life. Of course that was going to have an impact on the people who were there. And they said then you're gold panning, and you're an ex-convict, and you're panning next to a lawyer. And it was this weird thing where the class system in Australia and in England at that time was that the lower class don't associate with the top class. But at this stage, everybody was in it together and everybody had just as much chance as anybody else. They said ships were turning up, and the ships had all their crew were just getting off, leaving ships in the harbour with nobody on it because everyone was just going. And that last bit, about tens of thousands of people, because really the California goldfields were over, the potato famine had happened. There was a lot of people living in England who weren't living in good conditions, and the idea that people were making 10 years' wages off one find, of course, that was going to have an impact. So within a few months, people were pouring in from all parts of the world, which is going to be a big thing in the next few weeks, sessions to come. We're going to talk about what happens there. So basically that's where we're at now. We're at a colony that has now, or they also talked about what it did, that they said Melbourne became opulent, the centre of opulence. Now basically that means like class, wealth, which I guess is pretty weird considering that only, what would it have been, 70 years before that, Victoria was a colony, just had been founded on convicts, and really was still sending convicts over pretty much right up until this point. So what started as where we send our convicts had now become this wealth and class thing where all these people were walking around dressed properly and having these parties where they're just drinking champagne and sort of all these things. It's very funny to think of that in such a short amount of time they'd gone from a convict colony to being this centre of wealth and class. So basically that's where we've gone through the Sydney, what happened in Bathurst, just a little bit in Bathurst, and now we've gone through what happened in the Victorian goldfields, and they definitely took over from Sydney now, and then people were coming back from New South Wales, coming back through to Victoria because they'd heard that Victoria was the place to be. It's this ping pong thing where people are just going from one to the other. They hear people are making money here, we'll pack up and we'll go to this goldfield. It's basically just chasing around trying to find the best place to go. But overall, I think, with how close you were next to someone, you're here and they're here, you really don't have much room to find it, and you're pretty lucky if that's the place where you find the gold. But they do say in those early goldfields, people were finding, I don't know if you saw that video, that huge nugget that they found would have been worth so much money. So I hope that's given you some more information about what happened in the Victorian goldfields and how it just gone crazy. People were leaving their jobs, and you can understand really why Hotham, the governor, is angry, because he's going to turn around, which we'll go through in a next video, turn around and say, you can't just abandon all these shops. You can't just do this. How is our city supposed to run if everybody's out there working in the goldfields? How is normal society supposed to run? But that's for the next lesson. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you.